How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a coach, an educator, a mentor, an athlete. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Paul Oneid. How are you doing?
Good. I like that one and only. There's
ah,
actually there's actually one more. My grandfather's name is Paul.
okay, that's fair enough.
He doesn't train though. He's like 97.
Okay, that's a good innings. That's a good innings.
Yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll live that long. Probably not, but maybe.
You never know. You never know. So how are you, Paul? What's been happening in your world? What have you been up to?
Man, I'm doing really well. I just got back. I went to the Toronto Auto Show this weekend.
All
I
right.
was looking at a whole bunch of cars I can't afford to buy. Um, but other than that, I am kind of getting out of. I competed in a bodybuilding show in November. I've been kind of taking time since then to like kind of recuperate, get my body back to a set point, get back to training because I am transitioning back into more of a powerlifting focus because I would like to compete one more time in powerlifting at least. Um, and it's been a bit of a rough one. I'm up like 35 pounds. Um, so it's been an adjust. My body's like completely different than when I last touched the competition lifts. Um, and then business is going very well, as you mentioned. You know, I do coaching. I also do business mentoring for coaches, and I have an education site as well called Coaches Corner University. That we're actually looking to kind of change up the model, and there'll be some interesting news in the coming weeks and months about that transition. But yeah, everything's good. We're just rolling and getting ready to head into a productive off season, hopefully. How are
Oh,
you?
nice. I'm very well. Yeah, I was just going to say a lot of things keeping you busy there. Yeah. For me, long story short for me, but I ended up swapping gyms. So I'm now head coach of a new gym so that's been open for a couple of months now. So we're on track in terms of growing the membership and that sort of stuff. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's been pretty cool. With the because obviously you said there quite a lot of things that you've been getting on with as well. Obviously, I heard you speak at the Kabuki Education Week, so I was living on Pacific
Yeah.
time for a couple of weeks for that. How did you find that? Do you have other speaking gigs coming up, or how did you find that as opposed to speaking in person to people?
It's a bit different. So I have a lot of experience doing the Zoom style presentations because Coach's Corner is a pre-recorded site. So I do a lot of lectures to no one. So it was kind of weird. Initially it's weird to not have the feedback of a crowd, to not be able to read responses, understand, because most people have their videos off as well. And the way it was set up is like I had Dan and I had me, and then I just knew how many people were in the room. I
Right.
couldn't see the little boxes at the bottom. So like when I'm speaking live, it's very easy to know like if people are looking at you a certain way, maybe you elaborate on the point, or maybe you breeze through a certain topic and come back to it. So a little bit of you lack the social cues in that regard, but it was really great. The questions I got were awesome. The feedback I got was really positive, so that's always it's always nice. As of right now, I don't really have any speaking engagements planned other than myself and my wife are putting on a workshop at our gym in April, and then in July we're going to try and plan a seminar for my company, Master Athletic Performance, in the Greater Toronto area, and we're going to try to have all six of our coaches there. So that'll be pretty cool. See if we can get a good turnout for that one.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds pretty cool. And I always like to ask about because I've done the Kabuki Education Week for the especially being in the UK. It's really good to listen to speakers such as yourself. And I always wonder what it feels like because obviously from my point of view, when you go into the lecture, obviously you could just see someone like popping up and the people in there. So I'm always curious to see what it's like from the speaker side. Um, Obviously, I did quite a brief introduction there, but we've touched on,
Mhm.
the coaching, the mentorship. But for anyone listening who might not know your background, just want to give a little bit of a
Yeah,
background to yourself in terms of training and coaching.
for sure. So I grew up very active, played sports. I played basketball in university actually for my first year of university, and then transitioned into football. Had a knee injury, and it was through the rehab for that knee injury that I kind of fell in love with training. I started training when I was 17, a little bit late, but all I wanted to do was play basketball prior to then. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, well, I can't really keep up with these kids. I got to lift, I got to run, I got to train. Um, that I really started lifting. And then when I was rehabbing for that knee injury, kind of realized I was like, I'm really strong. I should probably just be strong. And so kind of started training for strength sports, but more so just to practice what I was preaching, because around that time was when I started coaching kind of the local athletes, did some personal training. This is around 2007, I believe. Um, so I've been coaching for 16 years at this point, almost 15, 16 years. Um, and then from there, when I got into, so after I graduated, I have an honors degree in human kinetics, and I decided I wanted to go into coaching. So who's the best strength coach in North America? And it turned out to be Ron McKeefery, who was at the University of South Florida in Tampa. So I called him up. I was like, I'd like to come intern with you. Is that possible? He said, sure, just get yourself here. It's unpaid. It's 30, I think it was 35 hours, 40 hours a week. I was like, okay, I guess I'm moving to Tampa. I worked at a supplement store. I did personal training. I did some online coaching. I bounced at a nightclub. Man, yeah, did all four of those things for like 10 months to save up enough money to move. Because if you're living in another country under a travel visa, you can't work.
Yeah.
So I had to make sure that I had enough living expenses for the 5 months I was going to be down there. While I was down there, I got accepted to grad school. And so I did my master's degree at South Florida in exercise science, all the while working in the strength and conditioning department. And that's also when I started powerlifting. I started powerlifting as a means to gain credibility with the athletes that I was working with, because I never played college sports. I was this like, chubby white kid from Canada. So what are these like NFL prospects going to listen to me for? You know what I mean? But then when they realized that I was really strong and I was pushing myself to the same degree I was asking them to push themselves, it was a lot easier to have those conversations. From there, I moved to Pittsburgh and was a strength and conditioning assistant coach at Robert Morris University. And I also did another master's degree there in sports management. From there, I moved back to Tampa, and I was the associate director of strength and conditioning at the University of Tampa for about 7 months. And then I moved to Kingston, Ontario, which is just south of me. Right now, I'm in Ottawa, Ontario, and I was the head strength and conditioning coach at Queen's University for a year. Went through a bit of a burnout with the strength and conditioning with the college world. Decided to step away. Took a job in the private sector as a disability consultant. So essentially, I helped people who are on disability rehab and get back to work. So I coordinated treatment plans. That also introduced me to the world of mental health. And during that time, that was remote work. So I was able to build my coaching business on the side, to the point where after about 6 years, I decided, coaching is a lot more fun than being at a computer all day dealing with people, and, not necessarily the type of work I want to be doing. So I stepped away from my full-time job and went into coaching full-time, and yeah, just continued to build my business from there.
Oh, nice. Quite a varied background then in terms of coaching and education. And one thing that I just wanted to touch on is obviously, getting involved in powerlifting and then working with the
Yeah.
athletes that you worked with. Was it kind of a good balance of you having that training sort of in the trenches yourself, but then also the education side of things to be able to speak to the athletes on a level, if you like, rather than sometimes just trying to throw information at them from what you've learned, if that made sense?
Well, the beauty of it was like, because my training up to that point was primarily athletic development focused, I didn't never had to ask a kid to do anything that I wasn't willing to do myself or hadn't already done. So there's a level of empathy as a coach there. So now when I coach someone through a bodybuilding prep, I've done a bodybuilding show. When I coach someone through a powerlifting prep, I've done 30 powerlifting meets. So I'm able to empathize with them and kind of let them know that the feelings that they're feeling are normal. I can validate them, I can reassure them, and I can also help them navigate these problems because I've also run into these problems as well. Um, in my opinion, if you're going to coach something, you should probably do it too, or have done it in the past at a reasonable level. Like, people will ask me often, like, do I have to be good at something to coach it? No. But if you're not pursuing your own level of excellence, why would someone ever trust you with theirs? Like, if you can't even get yourself strong or stronger,
Yeah.
how can you get someone else strong? How are you going to know what that feels like? Right? Like, and even I'll take it a step further. So at one point, I was ranked in the top 20 all time in two different weight classes in powerlifting. When you get up to those levels of strength, squatting over 800, deadlifting over 700, a lot of the rules just don't apply anymore. Right? Like volume landmarks, stuff like that. It's 800 pounds. And unless you've experienced that or coached enough people that have experienced that,
Yeah.
it's impossible to program for with any like modicum of success. Now, you can program for it, but you'll probably run your person into the ground. Um, so like that level of empathy that you have by walking the walk is invaluable in my opinion.
Yeah. And do you think because and I think I mentioned in the email that there might be a couple of tangents in there, a question that's coming
Yeah, for sure.
in there. But with that, do you think sometimes, especially for potentially younger coaches or coaches just starting out, do you think that sometimes where it's got to be they need to sort of dive into training and experience different things to then find out what their maybe specialist area is, rather than being like, yeah, I can coach you with powerlifting and bodybuilding, but at the minute they might be only finding the feet in their own training as well, if that kind of makes sense.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like, it's so hard to convince someone that this is the appropriate path to take, but working for free was the best thing I ever did for my career. It expedited my learning to the nth degree. Think about the number of athletes that I was able to step in front of over the course of 6 years in collegiate athletics. It's like 500 student athletes per year, 3 to 4 times a week. I've seen a lot of squats, benches, deadlifts, cleans, snatches, dumbbell presses, push ups, sprints. So it developed my eye to a degree. Like, I see a lot of things others miss. I've also developed frameworks around how to assess movement. I've also developed frameworks for like, you heard my talking about like how we manipulate the training paradigm based on what the goal is. And, that framework was developed over the course of seeing that many athletes in a weight room and then continuing. Like, I think we've coached with Master Athletic close to 700 people over the course of the last, and that's going to grow quite a bit because now I have 6 coaches with me after this past year. But yeah, we have like close to 700 athletes that we've coached. So it's a lot of people that have shaped this training paradigm with which I look at the world through, so to speak. Um, so you have to put in your time. You really have to put in your time. And one thing that I think is the most valuable words that you can echo to a client: I don't know. Shortly followed by, I will find out. Like, imagine being in a position where you're able to humble yourself and say, you know what? I don't know the answer to your question, but I will absolutely find it for you.
Yeah.
That's professionalism. The issue is you get a lot of kids who start coaching and they think they know everything. I was 100% that person. I remember my boss hated me because I always had an answer for everything and I was always right. But the more time I spend in this profession, the more I realize that very rarely is there ever one right answer. In fact, there's usually a bunch, and you won't really know it's right for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can get away with doing the wrong stuff for a really long time before you figure out it was actually the wrong stuff. So unless you have like these built-in KPIs, key performance indicators, you're really not going to know like if you're on the right path or not unless you've walked that path tens, 20s, 30, 40, 50 times with yourself and with different athletes. So you got to put in your time. So one of my biggest recommendations for coaches, like they want to start coaching, like just start coaching for free. Coach your friends. Maybe charge $20 just so there's at least some buy-in, 20, 50, whatever. At least there's some buy-in on their behalf. But as you grow your business, as you gather evidence of your ability to produce results, now you can start building a business.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of good points in there because it is that case of, like, how do you get, stronger? You need to put the reps in. It's the same like what you mentioned there
Yeah.
about, how many squats and deadlifts and sprints and bench presses that you've seen. It takes repetitions. It takes that time to see it. And it's funny that you say about, if you don't know the answer, you go and find that answer.
Yeah.
That's essentially how this podcast started. At first, I remember I just had my phone and I had members of the gym and clients who were asking questions. And I thought, I know, I'll just answer the question and be like, cool, this is episode 1. And then it got to a point where I got asked questions where I just felt as though I just wouldn't be able to give them
Yeah.
an answer that I felt was, yeah, probably just good enough, that I felt like I just couldn't do it. So, reaching out to, coaches such as yourself to be able to give people the answers from there, and, from my point of view, be able to learn a little bit myself along the way, because, sometimes. So we have like in the past, we've been involved in like internship programs with younger coaches coming in, and it's always
Awesome.
always a case of, that continued development, keep learning, because I look back to when I first started out leaving uni, thinking, yeah, I've got all the answers. I want to just
Yeah.
throw all this jargon at people, whereas actually, I probably say less now than what I did at the start. But I like to think what I say in sessions and feedback is useful with it. One thing
For
that you
sure.
mentioned there in terms of, the how you look in terms of the programming, and how you're working with clients. What or who influenced how you work now? Is it something that you refined over time, or is there more influence from one aspect of what you've worked before or the other? What's kind of created that over time for your how you work?
That's a really, really good question. Um, the number of people that have influenced me, I mean, I look like I have my bookcase behind me. So, every book I've ever read, every website I've ever visited. I mean, I remember initially it was Eric Cressy, Joe DeFranco, um, the old T Nation crowd, before it became more like a sales website. Christian Thibodeau, who's actually now like I speak with him relatively often, which is really cool. Um, I got the opportunity to be on Elite FTS's Table Talk podcast this past summer, which was a surreal experience. And Elite FTS, man, everything they've ever put out, I've read. Um, the coaches that I've worked with at the college level, I mean, Frank Wintrick, who is University of Virginia, UCLA, Utah State, Arizona State, Arizona State. Ron McKeefery was the University of Tennessee. He's now at Fresno State. Mark Hickok's head strength coach of University of Virginia, Justin Thiel, the University of Tampa, and then even like the private sector guys, my training partners, um, Todd Hammer at Robert Morris University. Like all of these people have had profound impacts on me as a lifter and as a person. Um, and then I mean, you know, all the basic, like all those old Russian texts, I've read them. All like, you know, Science and Practice of Strength and Conditioning, read it. All of Chad Wesley Smith's books, Mike Israel's books, read them. It's like, so for me, it's an accumulation of knowledge over the course of the last 15 years. It's also an accumulation of trial and error by blowing my body apart over the last 15 years. Um, Man, my training part, like I got so lucky with my training partners when I moved back to Ottawa. Like
Yeah.
at one point, I was training with Jay Nira, who's the number one 220 lifter in the world, Cade Weber, who's the number one 242 lifter in the world, Willie Albert, who is the number one 181 in the world in the past, and Shane Church, who's an equipped lifter, who's the number one 242 lifter in the world. Like those are my training partners. I squatted 800 pounds as the weakest person in the room. So just like that situation where I put myself in the shark pool with dudes that were absolute savages. I remember the first time I ever met Jay, he was like swearing under his breath, listening to music, and then running outside and puking between sets of 700-pound deadlifts. I'm like, okay, this is where I need to be. I try to do that same thing on the academic and coaching side. I try to surround myself with people who I view as being better than me. The funny part is a lot of those people who I view as better than me don't view themselves as better than me, which is so odd to me, you know. So like when I saw the presenter list at the Kabuki Education Week, I was like, holy shit. And then they asked me, like me? But like that's to me, that's been the most advantageous thing for me in my development is like being in the room where I'm the weakest, being in the room where I'm supposed to be the dumbest, and never believing that I have all the answers because I don't, and I never will. And you never will. So and so coach never will. And we're in a world where, you know, the most successful people on social media, which is the currency of our society right now, are those people who have unequivocally attached themselves to some niche concept. Carnivore MD, Liver King, guy like the number, like knees over toes guy, like all these people who are incredible, they're so tied to this one thing. So if you ever question them on that thing, they can't budge their opinion because that's their entire credibility is attached to that. I never want to be that.
Yeah.
Because one thing is never the answer. If you only have a hammer and everything's a nail, but we don't live in a land of nails. Some people are bolts, some people are screws, some people are nails, some people are, rivets. So, you have to have a massive toolbox.
Yeah.
So I rambled on and on about a lot of nothing, but diversify your education and always keep a white belt mentality, right? Even if you believe yourself to be smart, like I'm under no delusions that I'm an intelligent human being, but I don't know everything. And there are a lot of people who have more in-depth knowledge on certain topics than me. So if I want to learn about those topics, I go to those people.
Yeah.
And I still actively invest in my continuing education, both practically and academically. I wanted to learn about bodybuilding. I registered for John Jewett's J3 University course. I went through that, and I hired Luke Miller, who coincidentally went to the University of South Florida a couple of years after I did. So that was a nice, connection. But I worked with Luke, who works for John, and we went through a bodybuilding prep. So I did the education and I went through the prep. Now I can coach people through preps.
Yeah.
So you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have both sides, and you just have to put in a lot of time. And every time I talk about that, I feel so fucking old. Like, yeah, I've been doing this since you were 8. Like, I've been coaching, like, so my wife is 27. I've been coaching since she was 12.
Experience. That's all it is. It's just this.
That's all it is. Yeah, for sure.
But what a couple of things that you mentioned there, I thought were some really good points because it's I think from and I know I kind of went through a phase like this, especially when I first started reaching out to other coaches and athletes. I was like, who would want to speak to me, just a coach from a coach from Leeds. Whereas actually, when you're generally wanting to know answers and and learn, I think I mean, I always feel lucky when people do reply, but that uncomfortableness, if you like, actually you end up being able to develop it a little bit more and build that network from there. I think, which is shown over the X amount of episodes that I've done, that people are willing to share their knowledge. And the biggest thing for me is if somebody can take at least one thing from each episode, right, at least then they've I've helped them go from there, which I think is useful because I think there's whether it's going into a gym to train with people who are stronger or fitter or faster than you, that they're just going to be like, wow, well, what you training with us for, or what are you coming here for? Whereas actually, I think it's people will be surprised at how much other people will help you, to
Oh my
develop, which I
God.
think is good.
One of my favorite things in the world is having conversations with people who can be objective and not emotional about topics. Now, you've interviewed a lot of really intelligent people. Like, I went through like a little bit of your catalog and the types of people that you've interviewed. Tell me that the most intelligent, amazing coaches that you've interviewed were not the people who actively sought to be proven wrong. They all are. Right. And that's something that I learned a long time ago, and I hold with me to this day. If I can have a conversation with somebody who is actively trying to prove me wrong, it only serves to make me better, because I have to defend my point of view, and I have to be malleable in my approach, and I have to communicate it to somebody in a way that they understand. And if I am proven wrong, fucking fantastic. I just learned something.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot have an ego in this if you want to progress. The easiest way to halt your progress is to always stay in your echo chamber and to have an ego about your knowledge base and your expertise,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah, I think that's. I know we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there for the coaching side of
Okay.
things, but I think that was really useful, because I think for with and you kind of touched on it in terms of social media is like the success or failure of how people are seen, whereas actually sometimes the person with the loudest voice isn't it's not always
Very,
the
very
not always the
seldom it
noise.
is.
Yeah. So it's just a kind of yeah, which I'm a big believer in when whether I'm speaking to younger coaches or clients, is just sometimes just filter out that information a little bit. One thing that you said there about being proven wrong or proven right. And one thing that you touched on, and we mentioned it at the start, in terms of manipulating exercises, that risk to reward ratio. And I think sometimes that from coaches, that they'll have a bank of exercises that they feel need to be in people's programs, but aren't necessarily, depending on where people, and obviously as strength chat, more
Yeah.
talking about powerlifters and bodybuilders. But what's kind of the process within your head of where the exercise selection goes within a program, within a phase of training, off season, on season, so that people are like, right, okay, we're still getting a training effect, but we're still taking the other things into account to get the most benefit?
So there's a few like axioms that you need to live by in general with training. So it's like exercises are going to move from the highest neurological demand to the lowest neurological demand, the highest level of stability required to the highest level of stability offloaded, from the fastest to the slowest, from the highest skill to the lowest skill. If you adhere to that, you're probably going to be okay for most things. Where that gets a little bit more nuanced is when you start talking about, hitting the appropriate amount of volume for a given muscle group in bodybuilding, right? So you might want to prioritize certain body parts over others. And this is like higher level stuff. In general, take a middle of the line approach, train really, really fucking hard. You'll get 90% of the way to wherever you want to go. I firmly believe that. Yeah. I actually just had a conversation with a buddy of mine at the gym. And I said, the two most important things about training are do things that you really love doing and learn what effort is. Because if you're having fun and you actually know how to train hard, you're going to get really strong. You're going to get really big. Yeah. Without question. Now, managing recovery is one thing, right? So when you talk about a powerlifter, for example, that's going to be a lot more challenging because the movements that you're selecting are going to be more systemically fatiguing. They're all going to be internally stabilized, meaning that your body has to stabilize the load. They're all going to be axially loaded. So the load of the bar is going to be on the skeleton, meaning a vertical loading strategy, with the exception of the bench press. But when you incorporate leg drive, now you have a full body movement. And then the loads are going to be huge, relatively. So the bulk of that person's recovery demand is going to come from those exercises. So how do we manage that recovery? One of the best ways to do that, especially for someone who is not enhanced, is to increase frequency. So increasing frequency is a great way to improve motor learning. So get way better at performing the movement from a practice perspective. You want to get better at free throws? Practice your free throw. But further to that, we can have smaller exposures in each session. So instead of digging a ditch, we just dig a hole. So I like that analogy because it's really conceptually very easy to understand. So anytime you train, anytime you put your body under stress, you're digging a hole of fatigue. That fatigue triggers your body to accrue fitness, fitness being whatever adaptation that you're trying to stimulate. That adaptation is going to be specific to the demands placed upon it. So if you want to get good at 1 rep maxes, you're probably going to have to train relatively close to 1 rep maxes. We can get a little bit more nuance with that, but instead of doing, massive amounts of volume within one session, we might take that same amount of volume and spread it over 3 days or 2 days. Depending on the lift, depending on the needs of the lifter, that frequency is going to be dictated by a number of factors: their body size, their relative strength, their absolute strength, their experience level, orthopedic demands, all of these things, gender to some extent. And then from there, you want to choose assistance movements that will build that main lift. So assistance movements for me are classified into positional or structural. So positional being they have a weakness in some range of motion of that competition movement. So we're going to spend more time there. So that's pauses, pin presses, 1.5 reps, tempos, changing the range of motion. So like adding a deficit, altering the center of gravity. So changing the bar. Those are fantastic ways to do that. But again, systemically demanding. So what I actually like to do is I'll do a main lift on one of the days of the week, and then I'll do that supplemental barbell lift on another day of the week. Increase neurological efficiency, motor learning, and we're working on the deficits. From there, you have to go into function or structural builders. This is where we talk about building the musculature, filling out the frame. There's actually quite a lot of evidence that shows like a really shitty link between hypertrophy and strength. We used to believe in general that cross-sectional area was proportional to muscle strength. Cross-sectional area is proportional to the possibility of strength. And I believe that the limitations of the current research, which show that hypertrophy work does not improve strength, is limited by time, because the studies are done within like 12-week time frames. But in order to accrue a meaningful amount of muscle mass, you need a lot longer than 12 weeks.
Yeah.
But anecdotally, when you look at the amount of strength difference from weight class to weight class for people who have jumped weight classes, relatively speaking, body weight doesn't equate to a meaningful degree to the amount of strength the person accrues. So there's a lot of evidence both ways. Personally, I think appropriately dosed hypertrophy work will improve your resiliency under the barbell, because you are training the structure, the connective tissue, the tendons, all of these things. And who doesn't want to look like they lift? Like, I don't know. I don't want to see a marshmallow squat. Like, I always joke, I'm like, if you look like a tube sock full of mashed potatoes when you put your singlet on, there's a problem. So, so when you have those classes of exercises, right, then you look at, okay, where are the needs for this person? Again, reverting back to like, are we going to bias certain lifts? Are we going to bias certain muscle groups? And then we go into the session and go fast to slow, high skill to low skill, heavy to light. And we arrange our sessions in that way. And then you know what we do? We train really fucking hard. And then we look at I get my athletes to take notes every day on like how they're feeling, how they're performing. I get them to logbook. So they'll record their loads, their reps. And then we see, are we making meaningful progressions week to week? Are we able to hit the prescribed workloads? Is our performance within a given effort range, so like an RPE range or a percentage range, indicative that we're moving forward? Right? So we have these different KPIs built in. And if we're not, we're either doing too little or we're doing too much. And then we have to look at, okay, where are we doing too little or where are we doing too much? And you might even be in a place where you're doing too much of too little.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I remember there was one, I was working with a coach, and initially my volume on the main lifts was too low and my volume on the assistance work was too high. So I was always fatigued. And it was like, well, I could just put more volume on the main lift, ditch the accessory work to a large degree. Oh, look at that. I actually made progress. So I was doing too much and too little at the same time.
Yeah. And with that, because I know obviously, you know, you've gone through kind of like your thought process, the philosophy around that. And I think a big thing is going to be effort when people go into the gym. But do you think that's where coaches, or even, you know, because I know there's some lifters that, you know, program for themselves, where, you know, they're putting their efforts into the wrong place, and, you know, they're not getting efficient. I don't know what the phrase I'm looking for. Yeah, they're not being efficient with the training, so they're just spinning the wheels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see that more so. So like there's a few different kinds of lifters. There's the lifter that will literally run his head through a wall and just will continue to he's just so hard-headed and will train himself or herself into the ground. Then there's a lifter who will try to find the easy way out for everything. Then there's the lifter who looks at the wall and then finds the door and walks through the door. So you have to know what kind of athlete that you're dealing with. I'm very lucky that I've developed a few strategies over the years to kind of teach people what effort is. And so having those in place, we're like, okay, maybe we do an AMRAP, but we do it on a really safe exercise. So there's no chance the person can hurt themselves. And we teach them what failure truly is.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, wow, like I can actually move a lot slower than I am. Right. Like, have you ever grinded a squat
Yeah.
and then you go to do the next rep? You're like, there's no fucking way I'm standing this up. And then you do. That could have been potential progress left on the table had you been a little bitch, but you weren't. And that takes time to learn. So we could achieve that same thing on, say, a leg press. Let's do a set of leg press to failure. End up getting like, usually they want to rack it 5 to 6 reps early. And you actually see that in the research too, like the reps in reserve research. People are really, really bad at gauging reps in reserve.
Hmm.
So I use it sparingly, to be honest. A lot of the assistance work that I program is to failure. It's like, you're doing a leg press, go to failure.
Yeah.
You're doing a leg extension. You're not going to accumulate systemic fatigue doing a leg extension.
Yeah.
So it's fucking give her.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the level of effort is very, very important. But also, like, take the front squat, for example. I love front squats. I've never met a person with a shit front squat or a good front squat and a shit squat. But I've also met a lot of people with great squats who suck at front squatting. I personally believe that the front squat is a fantastic builder for the squat. And I used to get all my athletes to do them, but all of them hated it. They complained relentlessly. So I knew that they weren't going to try as hard as they could.
Yeah.
So I stopped programming front squats and I started programming safety bar front squats. So it's much more comfortable. The bar sits on your shoulders. You don't have to worry about, dropping your rack position, or upside down safety bar squats where you rack the safety bar backwards so the plates are up in front of you.
Yeah.
Upright squatting pattern, huge midsection implications. Boom. Similar movement. It's not a front squat, but it's pretty damn close. And people find it more enjoyable, so they put more effort into it.
Yeah. Do you think because we kind of go back to what we said at the start about experience it in your own training.
Yeah.
Obviously, from there's a lot of things that where you might have done that in your own training or seen other people that you've trained with. Do you think that maybe comes from if people are doing a front squat, they're like, well, why can't you do a front squat? We're just going to try and keep hammering away at front squats, knowing that people might not be able to put effort into it. That comes down to the experience of not being able to experiment with exercises from their own training, or building up that bank of knowledge.
I'll put it to you this way. Again, returning to a lot of what I've said in this conversation around coaching centers around the individual. Because ultimately, we're coaching a person, not a program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I hold to a very, very high amount of, like, that statement. Coach the athlete, not the program. For me, it's like rule number 1 of coaching. So there's 2 types of athletes when it comes to 3. There's the person that's going to do what you tell them to do. They're not going to complain. They might not enjoy it, but they're not going to complain. You have the person who's going to lollygag around, complain about it the whole time, and still do it. Then you have the person who's going to suck at it and see that as a challenge, and that'll actually motivate them to get better. Right? So which type of person is this? Is it the person who gets really discouraged when they suck at something? Or is it the person who gets fired up that there's an opportunity to improve? It's like, oh, I suck so bad at this. I bet if I get really strong at it, it'll improve.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm that person.
Yeah.
So I used to have a lot of trouble relating to the other people. But my time working as a disability rehab specialist, like, I transitioned from college strength and conditioning to like 50-year-old women with anxiety who couldn't leave their house.
Yeah.
Very, very different communication strategy with those two populations. And I got a crash course in how to relate to people, how to communicate with people, how to challenge their beliefs without compromising their values, right? That to me, I think was a really big expediter to my communication ability. And it really kind of showed me how important it is to get that buy-in from the individual in order to make the plan more productive.
Yeah. How did you, just touching on that, how did you find, that transition? Because especially that that's a, night and day, I can imagine, in terms of
Yeah.
sometimes the communication.
So I really love the rehab process. So when I left strength and conditioning, I actually, so when I was going through my burnout, I just quit. I literally was like, I cannot keep doing this. I walked into my athletic director's office and was like, I quit. She's like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm like, no, I'm done. She's like, can you stay a month and train whoever we hire? It's like, fine. So I trained the new guy. I left. I was like, I'll just personal train a little bit. And let me tell you, personal training, not for me. I personal train a few people now,
Yeah.
but they're people I really like, and they also have like nuanced injury histories, and personal trainers in the past have really failed them. So my expertise allows me to actually help them make progress, and I find the problem solving really interesting, and they're also really cool people. But personal training wasn't for me, so I started looking on LinkedIn. I started looking on a few of the like the recruiting websites that we have up here, and I came across this ad for a functional rehabilitation specialist. And the requisites were, kinesiology degree, bilingual, because I speak French too, um, and a whole bunch of other skill sets that I had learned by being a head strength coach. And I went in, I interviewed for it. I did really well. I had to speak French, and I hadn't spoken French in like 5 years, so it was interesting. Um, and then my boss Sally was like, "Oh, this is a fully remote position, right?" I was like, "Wait, so I get to work from home in my underwear?" And she's like, "Well, I'd prefer you weren't in underwear when you were on video calls with people, but yeah." I was like, "Did I get the job?" And it was awesome. And I tell people all the time, like when I talk about, we talk about young coaches. How do I get into coaching? Like, number one, put in your time. Number two, if you want to make a living at it, you probably want to build your business to a point in a stable environment where you're not like poor. Like I was making 65,000 a year full time while I was building my coaching business. I wasn't poor. I was paying my bills. Coaching was an added bonus. It let me pay off my student loans really fast. And as soon as I was done my student loans, I was like, oh, cool. Like this is really profitable. There's a few tweaks I can make. Here you go.
Yeah.
And then I was able to quit.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think but having that transition from there, I think sometimes it is trying to put those things in place for that, and it is, you've just said there how you've done it, whereas I think sometimes people will think, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do it, whereas there's opportunities there with it as well, which can put yourself in a position. But again, it's always going to fall back to things take time. It's not going to all of a sudden be like, I'm just going to leave and I want to do this. Like, it takes time. It takes time to build it up from there.
And it takes time to build a business. Like there's a big difference between a person who coaches people and someone who operates a coaching business.
Mm-hmm.
Very big difference. I was speaking to a young lifter this weekend I use the term coach very loosely here because I was actually embarrassed that this person called them a coach, who delivers their programming through Instagram DMs.
Wow.
That's embarrassing to the profession, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So the level of the barrier of entry to online coaching very low, but that's a guy who coaches people poorly. Whereas with our coaching business, we pay taxes for one. Um, we have a Google Drive for our clients full of resources. We have a Discord channel and a Facebook group for them. We do video calls. We have templated check-in sheets, standardized communication guidelines. When you sign up to, when you sign up for your insurance, they give you a terms of service, which says this is what you're going to get from us. We have one, right? We have a cancellation policy. We have, policies in place that allow us to run our business consistently, whether you're working with myself, my wife, Olivia, or even our newest coach, Carly. Right? Across the board, the same level of service. That's a coaching business.
Yeah.
And that takes time to build. And in this day, people believe like, oh, if I just start posting on social media that I'm coaching, I'll get clients. Nope. Because as soon as the way the algorithms work now is as soon as you offer a service, it nerfs your visibility. So if you attach a product or a service to your post, Instagram reduces your reach. So how do you put it out there that you're coaching clients, that you are offering a service, that you're good at what you do? Well, you need social media because if you exist in an online space, you need to have an online presence. But your social media is essentially your business card. So when you heard about me or you heard me speak, you went to my social media page and you're like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. I got credibility from my social media page. That's one of the goals of social media. The other goal is to add value, right? So you identify who your ideal client is, and then you speak to them. You address the issues that they're running into. You show that you can solve those issues, and then you provide evidence of you solving those issues. That gets the buy-in, increases your social capital, increases your credibility. The other thing that you need to do in your social media is share a bit of your humanity. I share my dogs, I share my wife, I share my own training, right? Because as much as people want to work with master athletic performance, if they're being coached by me, they want to work with me, the person.
Yeah.
They don't want to work with this, ultra technical AI robot coach. And I mean, there's a lot of AI programs that can write programming now, but they're not coaches.
Yeah.
Right? So social media serves a purpose. In this day and age, very little of that purpose is client acquisition. So then you say, how do you get clients? You start talking to people in real life. Right. Because as soon as you start coaching a couple people, those people tell other people. Now you can also start sharing that you coach people. You start changing the language with which you speak on social media. So when you make your posts on social media, instead of saying, I like to do this, say, I program this for my clients because.
Yeah.
When I coach a lifter towards X, you start speaking as a coach. Immediately, someone's like, oh, you're a coach. Yeah. When I started mentoring coaches, I started sharing the successes of the people that I was mentoring. I started speaking from a perspective of when you build a business, I've helped people build businesses that, right? So that's little subtle ways, but the big one is, leverage your assets, leverage your social credit, and know the audience that you're speaking to ahead of time so that you can tailor your language toward that, and it'll start picking up. It'll come slow, but it'll pick up. Yeah. And then that 3 clients turns into 6. That 6 turns into 10. That 10 turns into 12, 15. And then at about that 20 client mark, that's when enough people are talking about you that your progress kind of hockey sticks. And that jump from 20 to 30, 20 to 30, 30 to 40 gets pretty quick.
Yeah. I think that was a lot of good things there. And one thing that as you were speaking, I was kind of nodding about is, I think, yes, there's AI and all those sorts of things, but you kind of touched on it before in terms of when I asked the question, what influenced your take on programming and exercises? You actually went and spoke to people. You actually went and found, training partners, and we can get around, all of the new things that you can do and everything. But ultimately, coaching is one coach and one client, and building that relationship, getting that buy-in, and being able to know, again, another point that you mentioned, you're coaching that individual. You're not coaching, just, oh yeah, just use this program. It's that person that's in front of you. And we've touched on it a couple of times of, everyone's going to be different in terms of what they mechanically, what they can do, emotionally, how they feel about things and everything. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, and quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there,
Yeah.
Paul, what we've chatted about
Sorry.
today. But the
A lot of
last
pre-workout in my system right now still.
the last question that I like to ask, from everything that we've chatted about there, and for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Does it have to be from what we talked about?
It could be anything you like.
So there's two things that I think really help me from a life perspective and also from a coaching perspective, training perspective. So I try to live my life in a way where like 12, 13-year-old Paul would be like, yo, you're fucking cool. So like for me, thinking about, are the decisions that I'm making today in line with both my past and my future? So I think a lot about the future, like my wife, my future children, what retirement looks like. Am I meaningfully moving towards that place? And am I doing things that are making me happy? Asking yourself, am I happy? Is probably one of the most sobering questions that you can ask yourself. Okay, so ask yourself, are you truly happy? And are you truly having fun? Because life, you only get to live life once. Like people say YOLO, and it's usually attached with like, I'm going to do stupid shit. It's like, no, like have the experiences, make sure that they're meaningful, be present in your life, be the driver of the car. That's and you can apply that broadly across every aspect of your life, from training to work to your daily activities. The other thing, probably not what you would expect me to say, but contemplate death. And that's a very like, so there's a Stoic, Stoicism is a branch of philosophy. I'm not really going to go into it, but they have this concept called memento mori, which simply means remember death. Because all of us will die. All of us only have one life to live. So any moment that you're not present, any moment that you're not actively pursuing things that fulfill you, in my opinion, is a moment wasted. Time is a non-renewable resource. So make the most of the time that you have here. Applying that to training. Make sure what you're doing is fun. Make sure what you're doing is leading you towards progress. Make sure that what you're doing actually is moving the needle. When it comes to your nutrition, make sure what you're doing tastes good. Make sure what you're doing is actually, again, moving the needle. Same with life, right? Like actively seek out things that make you better. Oftentimes those things cause a lot of discomfort, but that's how you make progress. Then just keep doing that for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
And you probably get to where you
Absolutely, and why I was smiling when you mentioned that there, because I can't think what it's called. You might have just said it. It was where there's a calendar and you tick off, and it's like the weeks of the weeks of the year, and you count down from there. And funnily enough, I had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago with another coach that I know, and actually, it's actually attached to the wall just above where my laptop is
That's
that I'm
awesome.
facing now, and I have one for my training, one for work, one for just like personal life, and then
Mhm.
one fun thing that we want to do there. And I think sometimes, unless you've like had a look into it, I'm really glad that you mentioned about that, because sometimes when I've said it before, I'm thinking about, yeah, should I mention like death, because I don't think people people are like, what do you mean? But
It's a
actually,
bit of a weird concept. I mean,
mm,
like there's also I forget who said it, but I heard it along. I think it might have been Jordan Peterson. He was like, write your own obituary. Like, what would people say about you when you die? And like, not that everyone in the world is going to like you all the time, but if you leave the world a better place than you came into it, it's a pretty cool thing to think about.
yeah, definitely.
Like, I don't aspire, like I mentioned the car show and all these cars I can't afford. Like, I don't aspire to be wealthy, right? I aspire to be able to support my family comfortably, to be able to do the things that I want to do and have some measure of financial freedom. And if I can do that through things that align with my personal values and that align with things that I love and that align with helping people, man, think about how cool that is.
Yeah,
Think about
absolutely.
how unique of a situation that is to say, I help people and I help them in a meaningful way. And that help allows me to live the life that I want to live. You ever seen the movie Office Space?
No, no, I've not seen that.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. No.
You should watch the movie Office Space. The premise of the movie is there's a gentleman who's like hates his life, works in an office, is going about his daily life, contemplating how shitty it is. And then there's a whole bunch of hilarious things that happen. But I imagine the average person like that. They wake up, they hate their life. They trade 40 hours of work during the week for 2 days of a weekend that they can't even enjoy because they're recovering from the shittiness of the 5 days prior. Like, I never want to be like that.
Yeah. I do always say I don't think I could work I don't think I could work in an office or anything like that. So
The only reason I was able to for 6 years was because my boss left me alone. She's like, this is your job. Do your job. I don't care how you do it. Just follow the rules and we're good. It was awesome.
Nice. I
Yeah.
think there was we could have done a completely another episode
Yeah, man.
after those words of wisdom there. But no, I was glad you mentioned that, and I think you explained it a lot better than I think what I've done to other people from there. But literally a couple of weeks ago, I had that conversation, and then there's like a hobby craft shop not far away from where the gym is. And I was just walking past and I was like, I'm gonna grab one and I'm gonna do that. And actually,
Nice.
it's that thing of right, what have I actually done this week? Doesn't always happen every week with other things that happen, but that's not the for people listening, that's not the point of it. The point is like, you've I think the biggest thing that I'm a big believer in is that if you say you're going to do something, actually do it. Did you say what you said you were going to do? Did you put that effort in? And along the way, if it's things that actually mean, all the things that I've written down are things that I enjoy, that are fun. They're not things that I'm not. Obviously, those things need to get done sometimes. But if you do the things that you enjoy, it's that it's they're not going to become chores, and you're not going to end up falling behind from that. Thanks a lot, Paul, for taking the
My
time to
pleasure.
jump on. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you today.
This
For
is great.
everyone listening who might want to see the content that you put out there, the coaching that you offer the mentorships, where can people find you or reach out to you?
For sure. So our website is www.masterathletic.com. You can find me on Instagram at Paul Oneid, PAULONEID, or at Master Athletic Performance. And then you can find Coaches Corner University at Coaches Corner U or coachescorneru.com.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed chatting
Pleasure,
with you.
man. Anytime.
Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.